The bottom-up meeting, and you can get this very well through planning processes or participatory planning processes.
Dennis, we're going to go in for a short break, but when we come back, we'll talk a little more about urban violence and, of course, about you. All that and a lot more after this break.
लड़कों को कैसे करें इम्प्रेस? स्टाइलिश न्यू हेयरकट, एक्सपेंसिव ड्रेस, पर बजट है कम, पॉकेट मनी ऑलमोस्ट खत्म। 5 रुपए है क्या? 5 रुपए में क्या होगा? 5 रुपए में अब मिलता है प्रिया गोल्ड बार बाय बिस्किट।
क्या जिद्दी दागों से मैं बेटी की पॉपस्टार टी शर्ट की चमक कम होने देती? बिल्कुल नहीं, इसीलिए मैंने चुना एरियल।
एरियल की डीप क्लीन टेक्नोलॉजी कपड़ों के रेशों से जिद्दी दाग निकाले ताकि उनकी नई जैसी चमक आपके लिए रहे बरकरार। एरियल ऑक्सी ब्लू।
इंडिया में इकोनॉमिक प्रॉस्पेरिटी बढ़ी है तो मिडिल क्लास नंबर बढ़ा है। जो मिडिल क्लास एक कंफर्ट को सीख करता है, एक उसका स्पेंडिंग पावर है जी, इन दोनों में इम्प्रूवमेंट आया है। तो जब इससे एक मर्जिंग पॉइंट आता है तो वो जो मिडिल क्लास है वो फिर एयर टिकट को अफोर्ड कर सकता है, कंफर्ट अफोर्ड कर सकता है।
नमस्ते, मेरा वाला टूथब्रश देना।
दादाजी आज मैं खरीदूं? अंकल एक ओरल बी शाइनी क्लीन टूथब्रश दीजिए।
ये लीजिए। ये तो महंगा ही होगा, साहबजादे को शहर की हवा लग गई है।
नहीं, ये सही तो कह रहा है। ये ओरल बी का शाइनी क्लीन टूथब्रश है, जेड शेप्ड सॉफ्ट ब्रिसल्स और सुरक्षा कैप के साथ, सिर्फ 13 रुपए में। और ज्यादातर डेंटिस्ट भी ओरल बी टूथब्रश ब्रांड का ही सुझाव देते हैं। ओरल बी शाइनी क्लीन टूथब्रश।
मेरी फिटनेस का सीक्रेट प्रिया गोल्ड मारी लाइट बिस्किट, जो है 89.9% फैट फ्री। लाइट खाओ, लाइट रहो।
Welcome back. We're still in conversation with Dennis Rodgers, social anthropologist. Dennis, as a society, how violent is Indian society?
Well, it might come as a surprise to know that actually, on a global scale, Indian society is not hugely violent, at least not in terms of standard indicators such as homicides and so on. On the other hand, Indian society can be seen as very violent in more structural terms. It has some of the highest rates and extents of poverty. It also has huge and increasing levels of inequality. And this is, I think, one of the major features and considered features of contemporary Indian society. It also is a country which is, of course, well known for caste communal violence. And there are two aspects of this violence. On the one hand, there are episodic, spectacular explosions of violence, which are very violent, and you have multiple people killed. And at the same time, you also have the everyday violence of, say, caste discrimination, untouchability, and so on. Because, of course, violence exists on a continuum. If you look at overt physical forms of violence, if you're looking at their distribution, you'll find that most of the time Indian society is not hugely violent. But if you look at more psychological forms of violence, as I said, structural forms of violence, Indian society can be very violent.
Are there ways to recognize violence and find out whether it's brewing, and how do you kind of take action before it actually spills over?
That is in some ways the $64,000 question. It's very, I mean, if we had advanced warning mechanisms, we would probably be a less violent society. I think what you find is there are certain major issues which have been proven over history and across societies to be very much linked to violence. And to me, the most important one is inequality. I think, or I don't know, you may have read The White Tiger by Arvind Adiga,
Yes.
which I know shocked a lot of my Indian friends because they felt this is not an accurate representation of Indian society. On the other hand, it's a book which I think shows very well how increasing inequality and the disconnection between rich and poor can actually generate profound senses of injustice and lead to forms of violence. And I think we are seeing this increasingly in India. 30, 40 years ago, the distance between rich and poor was not as big as it is now, but more than that, the rich were also more embedded within Indian society and had more contact with the poorer strata of society. Now you're having an elite class which lives in a global context with a global culture in disconnected houses and across different locations.
Very insular, you know.
Very insular. But at the same time, is very ostentatious in their conspicuous consumption. And that can only generate resentment, and ultimately, at some point, some people will say, well, why do they have everything and why do I have nothing? Why am I suffering? Why are my children suffering? Why is my family suffering? And I mean, a very famous social scientist, of course, wrote about this. Not everybody agrees with him, but some of the elements of his analysis about the way in which rich and poor often enter in kind of conflict is very relevant today, and this is Karl Marx, of course.
And also, how do we see wealth? Do we see it as an individual property or individual access to privileges, or is wealth more global?
On the one hand, wealth is individual. You generate wealth through individual enterprise and so on, although the number of people who are so-called self-made men or women is very small. When you actually scratch below the surface, you see that often they are building on long accumulated reserves, which have not always, have often actually been accumulated initially through an initial point of violence by the dispossession of others.
True.
But I think the bigger issue in some ways is the notion of public good. Are there certain things, I mean, increasingly, for example, you're having gated communities, closing off certain spaces. Who gives the right to somebody to actually say own an area, close it off, keep a forest for themselves, keep natural reserves for themselves? This, I mean, in some ways, weren't these some of the complaints that were being levied against colonialism? Can we not be levying them against
it's
the
just
elite
changing.
today?
You're right, it's just the players are changing, but the dynamics and the pattern is very similar. And it's also about, how do we see the individual? Is the individual just me and myself, or is it an extension of individuals, and how do we see ourselves?
I think there's a famous phrase by, I think, the poet John Donne, no man is an island. No individual is just an individual. We're all constituted through being in society. What is happening is that you are having a process of disembedding of individuals and groups, and that is perhaps the major problem today. And it's not just a problem in India, it's perhaps even more evident in Latin America, which suffers the highest levels of inequality in the world. Brazil, for example, has huge disparities between rich and poor, and this translates itself in some amazing, almost surreal physical, material constructions, such as condominiums, which are very high, have helipads, and people who seem to live their lives going from condominium to condominium by helicopter, avoiding the hoi polloi below, for example. Or when an elite captures a state. In Nicaragua, which is a country where I have done a lot of work over the past 15 years, the Nicaraguan state is an oligarchy. The elite control it. And you can see this in the tax regime of the country. Nicaragua is one of the few countries in the world where inequality rises after taxation. Taxation is supposed to be redistributive, but actually what you find is that the rich in Nicaragua get richer as a result of the taxation structure of the country.
You were a part of a Nicaraguan youth gang.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I'm an anthropologist, and anthropology, the basic research method of anthropology is participant observation, which generally means the anthropologist is going to live in the context they want to study and interacting both as a participant and observing people there. So you talk, you interact, you participate in everyday activities. Now, I did not go to Nicaragua to study gangs. I actually personally think that anybody who wants to study gangs purposefully through participant observation is probably either mad or has a bit of a death wish. But I went to Nicaragua to study solidarity and cooperation amongst the urban poor. And I arrived in a post-conflict context after a revolution that had come to an end. And what I found was not very much solidarity and cooperation, but a lot of violence. I acquired the rather unfortunate habit of being attacked and beaten up by gangs during my first few months there. And when I finally managed to move into a poor slum, which was notorious for its gang, well, to put it mildly, I was rather terrified. And after 3 days of staying in the house of the family I was staying with and interviewing everybody multiple times, I finally did what an anthropologist has to do, which was go and sit on the curbside and try and engage in conversation with people. And the people who came to check me out were the local gang. Now, to cut a long story short, after a while they asked me whether I wanted to become a member of the gang. And I thought, on the grounds that if you can't beat them, join them, that I might as well become a member. But now this led to all sorts of interesting escapades and capers, as you can imagine. But on the other hand, it was also an incredible research opportunity. And it allowed me to have a contact, a very, very close contact, and a continuing relationship with the gang, which this particular gang in this poor neighborhood where I have been going back regularly since 1996 and seeing how it's changed and evolved over time.
Now I'm going to bring you back from those memories into Patna. I believe, थोड़ा हिंदी बोलते हो?
थोड़ा मेरा हिंदी अच्छा नहीं है.
थोड़ा और रहोगे तो अच्छी हो जाएगी. So incentive for you to stay here.
ठीक है. Yes, it would be.
अब कुछ खाने के बारे में बताओ. कुछ local Indian खाने के बारे.
I think, contrarily to a lot of people, I rather like Bihari cuisine. And my favorite dish is choka, which is a mixture of mashed potatoes with onions and chili.
Okay.
But I'm also rather partial to leti, which is there are little balls made of sattu, which is a kind of pulse and grains mixed together. It's a bit of an acquired taste. It's very heavy. And generally, Bihari cuisine, it's true, it's perhaps not as sophisticated as, say, Rajasthan or Gujarat particularly, which has a very sophisticated cuisine. But in some ways, it's the cuisine of my youth, and I have wonderful memories of it.
All right, over the years. And so, have you learned to cook these?
Well, some of them. My last time I was in Patna, I was shown how to cook brinjal, the kind of Bihari way, which is about where you burn the skin on a flame in order to give it a very smoky taste, and
that's
delicious. But but Patna is a city of many memories for me. I was mentioning to you before, I went to school in Patna, to Rosebud School, which was run by Mrs. Rizvi. I didn't have the chance to go back there, but I know it still exists. And I also have great memories as a child of going regularly every weekend to go to a bookshop called Trisel, where I would buy Amar Chitrakatha, which is the foundation of my Indian cultural knowledge. Trisel is still there. It's been there for 45 years, and the owner remembered me when I went there.
I just want to tell you, Dennis, it's been lovely really having you on the show, and
thank you very much.
Seeing a bit of India through you. Thank you so much. Look forward to meeting again.
Thank you very much.
हमारा संकल्प कि हम बनाएं कुछ बेहतर और बेहतर। घड़ी डिटर्जेंट पाउडर अब और अधिक शक्तिशाली।
पहले इस्तेमाल करें फिर विश्वास करें।
तो आज के फंक्शन के लिए क्या?
मोटी सी चोटी।
बाल बहुत पतले हैं और इतने झड़ रहे हैं।
₹1 का पैंटीन, ये चोटी बनाए मोटी और बालों का गिरना करे बिल्कुल कम। पैंटीन अब सिर्फ ₹1 में।
कीमत छोटी, चोटी मोटी।
एविएशन सेक्टर में जो क्वालिटी कस्टमर को मिलना चाहिए वो फार सुपीरियर हो चुकी है, और इसको अगर आप वेस्टर्न वर्ल्ड से कंपेयर करें उससे डेफिनेटली मच सुपीरियर।